Hey guys, Ninja Prav here. I've got Richard here again with me today this week. Hey Richard, and today...
Hey mate, how are you?
Pretty good, mate, pretty good. And today we're going to talk about something very important to our customers out there. Here we're going to talk about the stuff that our customers should be looking at when selecting an IT vendor.
Yes. This is going to be a really short one because clearly, we both work for Dell. So choose Dell.
Simple as...
Cool. Thanks for watching, everyone.
No, it has to be more than that.
Okay.
Yes. So I want you to take us through the, let's start with basics. We are a customer. Pretend that I'm your customer and I'm in the market to go and select an IT vendor.
Yep.
What would my decisions should be based on? What, as a third person, as a person who has been working in IT for a number of years, who has a lot of experience in the vendor field as well as customer land, from using your experience, what would you advise me as a customer? Should I look into my next IT vendor selection?
Right. Look, clearly there's a lot you need to look at there, some of which, we can probably cover quite well today, some of which is going to be quite tricky. There's going to be, one of the obvious things is how much is this thing going to cost? So yep. Cost is always going to be there. That is something that individual businesses need to work out what makes sense for them. You can go down a sort of financial analysis path and try and do TCO and ROI. And again, that is really down to businesses and the level of maturity that they have in that space. And some businesses are able to do that and actually calculate that stuff. And others just, they're not in a position to be able to even really do that. So really they just sort of look at capital cost or not capital cost. I'm using the wrong terminology there, I think. Just the cost to purchase the kit. Yep. The one thing I will say, even if you're not an expert at doing TCO or ROI, typically purchasing the kit is the cheapest part in the whole life of an environment. So yes, clear, it's always going to be important because the business has to pay for what they're buying. But I will say, don't think that is just the end of the expense of running the platform.
Yep. So what you're saying is basically cost is an important part, but it should not be the only reason why you would select a vendor. This is the cheapest, just pick this person up.
I would say, and okay, clearly, I work for a vendor, but yeah, I don't think that is always the best way to just select a vendor.
That's a very good advice. Again, like I said, you have that wealth of experience within the vendor land as well as enterprise customer space. So, and that's where we're seeking all those advice. We're trying to leech off that information off you as a customer. So let's say I'm there and I've selected, 5 vendors out there. One is a very small vendor. One is a very large vendor. And 2 or 3 are within the medium sort of range. Who should I be leaning towards? Or should I go, no, Mr. Chief, you're out completely? Again,
I think and again, I guess this is easy for me to say as a Dell employee, I think reputation matters a lot for that as well. Again, you could just look at the little, what we would call white label solution, but are they going to be there in the long run to support your business? You save some money up front on that purchase cost. And like we already said, that's a small amount versus everything else. I'm not saying that you should pay over the top odds to get a name brand vendor in there. And by name brand, obviously Dell, HPE, Lenovo, they're all brands that have been around for a considerable length of time. I think people understand and realize that they're not really going away anywhere in a hurry. So if you invest in a solution from one of those, I'll just say tier 1 vendors, just because I think people understand that terminology, then I think that is a good place to start.
That's a very good advice, actually, because when you deploy a given infrastructure, it won't be for 1 or 2 years. Usually it's like 3 to 5 years, and in some cases even longer. So you want to make sure that vendor is around in those 5-7 years time.
Absolutely. If you're really unlucky, you're right. It could even be for longer because there are definitely customers out there that are sweating assets to 7 years. But
Yep.
I guess where that if you are a customer like that, where you know the business traditionally makes you really sweat those assets out, then
Yep.
make sure you pick a vendor that you're happy with their support. And that, I guess for me, that's one of our, when I'm talking to people about our solutions and they start challenging us on why Dell EMC, I think support is probably the thing that I pivot back to most. Make sure you're happy with the support, the level of support you're getting. And I'm not just talking about whether you're on a 4-hour SLA or a next business day and all that. Like, what else are they bringing to the table there as well? And again, we mention this a lot. Open Managed Enterprise. I know I've mentioned it probably in the last 2 vlogs that we've done now, but aligned to that as well, Support Assist Enterprise and some of the things that we can do from a support point of view with automatic dispatch of parts for fixes and automatic ticket logging and those sorts of things. They really add value to customers and are just part of buying a Dell EMC server.
So basically what you're saying is, yes, it's easy to get a vendor who does provide like a good quality support, but what is also important is not only to get the support, but get it in quickest possible way, the least resource hungry way. Like, you do not have to have a team of people just managing that support within your own organization. And obviously the chances of recovering from that that issue that you're having, that the problem that you're having on the infrastructure, resolving that as quickly as possible, recovering from it.
Absolutely. I think that resolving it as quickly as possible thing, and we'd be dreaming to say that that Dell have never had a failure out there, and that customers haven't had a problem or a bad experience with some of our kit. That's just real world, but it's how we handle that failure and how we stand behind those customers. And I'm actually right now where where are we? July? Yeah,
July,
it's July
already,
2020.
Where's the time gone?
And the reason I'm saying this is that July 2020, I'm actually helping a New Zealand customer at the moment. They're experiencing a problem on their infrastructure. And I was just looking at the email today, and we literally have 27 people backed up and behind on this. So this is engineering guys and everyone covering the whole platform as a Dell EMC platform. So storage, networking, and servers. There are 27 support engineers working away on this in the background. And I'm not talking about a bank or a huge brand name customer. If I mention their name, which I won't, no one would even know who they are. And we're talking about a customer that has got a SAN, a couple of switches, an MX modular platform with sort of 7 blades. So not a huge environment, and yet we're right there trying to sort this problem out that they're experiencing in the solution. So
that sounds like the half of Wellington population, 27 people.
Man, it's really interesting that you picked Wellington out, because they might actually be based in Wellington.
I'm just picking because
that's
it's
uncanny, mate.
2 cities. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that is the difference for me, is how we stand behind customers, because things go wrong. It's how we deal with that. That's important.
That's important. And then the other question, other challenging aspect of this thing would be, I'm a customer, I have my own data center. But then on the other hand, I am another customer who may not have my own data center. I'm just using a shared services like a colo or something like that.
Right.
Will that make any difference in making my decision? Should I consider anything in relation to that? Yeah,
look, so now we start getting into the bread and butter of all of this, right? So clearly there are a whole bunch of technical requirements, and whether you are hosted or whether you're in your own data center can make a difference, particularly when it comes to the amount of rack space the solution is taking up, or the amount of power that solution is drawing. So that if you're in a hosted environment, those might be considerations that you need to think about. If you've got it in your own data center and you've got quite a bit of space, then you're not going to care as much about whether you go with a 1RU server solution or a 2RU, or potentially maybe even exactly how much power they draw. Whereas in a hosted scenario, that's probably something that a customer would be interested in. And then we get
Well,
into a host of other technical things, right?
yeah, interesting that you touch the point on your own data center, but you have that liberty. I've actually worked with a customer where everything was fine, power was fine, rack space was fine. They were hitting cooling capacity. So yes, that would affect. Like that's a very good point, like you said before.
Yeah.
It's something simple as cooling capacity. It can take number of months to resolve and a considerable amount of resources and money to resolve. So they might be limited by just cooling. That's one of those things.
100%. And so I guess one of the things, that we want to cover off today is the tools that we have available to assist customers. So when it comes to that, we have what we call the enterprise planning tool. And that enables us to configure down to everything like the DIMMs, the network cards, hard drives, etc., that are in devices, and it will spit out, right, this is how much the thing weighs, this is how much its influx current is, this is how much power it's going to use, this is BTU. And we can build entire solutions like that. So, and again, some customers, that's not a massive consideration for them, so we don't go through that exercise. Others, they care about it, and we have to spend time doing that so we can provide that information. So
exactly,
it's about, and part of this as well about this engaging with a vendor is understanding what questions to ask. If this is important for you, ask your vendor or partner. You don't necessarily have to be purchasing directly from a vendor. Maybe you're going through a channel partner. Cool. Ask the channel partner and start getting the information, because we've got a lot of tools to help make
that's
good
that's
decisions.
why we're running this series, so to make sure that our customers know those questions to ask, and helping them out to get that, be that intelligent when we have that conversation. You already have that information in your back pocket, so it's someone is not taking you for the run.
Yes. Because the next thing when people are going to be looking at, particularly if they're looking at compute replacement, so let's talk about service. Then if they're one of those really unlucky customers that we were talking about earlier, that's been sweating the asset forever, they could be on an Intel CPU that is 4 or 5 generations old.
Yep.
And so now you're looking at, they'll be looking at the information they have available to them, which is how many cores do I have and what gigahertz do I have? And then they compare that to a modern, again, July 2020, we're talking Intel Xeon SP, we've got the second generation of those out there, AMD Epic.
Yes.
If they just look at the number of cores they had before and go, cool, then typically those older CPUs have lower core counts, but quite gigahertz rich. And then they go and look at a modern CPU and go, oh, hang on a second, core count is through the roof. But gigahertz might not be. Intel have been trimming gigahertz back on that. So they've got to consider that. How do I make a decision on what I'm going to do there? So again, tools that we have available to help customers. I call it the horsepower spreadsheet. So officially it's called CPU meter. And so that's available to us as a pre-sales person within Dell EMC. It's also available to our channel partners as well. So this isn't available directly to customers, but customers can engage with us and we can provide the information. And now we can go, right, what is that old CPU that you're looking at? What might look like an appropriate CPU for you now, today? And we've got to consider things like licensing. Are you running a huge Oracle infrastructure or SQL infrastructure that are licensed? The number of cores will make a big difference there. Even other Microsoft products, the server portfolio as well. So we do have to balance some other, I guess, non-technical performance related things, but definitely important to the overall cost of the solution. And then we can use a spreadsheet, pop the CPUs in there, and then what the spreadsheet actually gives us, I call it horsepower, because I think most people I'm dealing with in the IT industry, we typically, so many guys like car heads. So horsepower mate, it just makes sense to people as a general rule. And so what it's actually giving us is the spec benchmark ratings for all the CPUs. So we can use that to now make an informed decision on what should you use? What actually makes sense? Because if we just go, oh man, we're going to deliver is the same amount of gigahertz today that you've got on your 5-year-old kit, man, we could be massively overspeccing this, and therefore cost going up for no reason. You won't use it. So
especially if you're running a virtualization stack, or that's what you're planning to do.
Yes.
We all know the number of core versus number of gigahertz, that is the traditional argument.
Yep.
And that always plays into the planning. So that's a very good point that you picked up.
100%. And the same is true for storage as well, right? Like, and again, if we sort of, even if you're not a customer that's, had to sweat your storage, you might have something that's relatively modern. You've got a good array. It's 16 gig fiber channel connected. It might even be, have some SSD in there. But what do you need to do now? So again, another tool, and actually this helps us with the CPU equation as well. So another tool that we have available to us is called Live Optics. And it's a simple tool that, and particularly in virtualized environments, very simple, because you just point it at vCenter or you point it at your Windows admin and grab the data out of those clusters. So then we can see all sorts of information to make, again, actual informed decisions rather than just taking guesses. So now we really get to see how many gigahertz have you got? How many are you using? Cores, obviously, typically all the cores being used.
You are telling me my engineers do not need to pull that out manually?
No, not at all. And people can do that. Like if you're a VMware environment, you can, RV tools is what we typically, but again, you get a big spreadsheet with a whole bunch of numbers. If you know what you're doing, you can start to make sense of those numbers. Live Optics provides from a customer point of view, you basically get a PDF or a PowerPoint document that will summarize all that information for you. And there's no cost involved with us running that for customers. It helps us from a pre-sales point of view, and it helps customers so that when you are going to market and talking to vendors, you're now not taking a guess. You're going, right, well, this is the number of cores I've got. This is how much memory I've got.
Basing it on hard facts.
Real facts. And then as we're sort of talking about storage, now that becomes really important. Cool. Yeah, I've got this array. This is the amount of IOPS it's delivering to my business. This amount of latency and throughput that it's delivering. So when we spec something new, we aren't just going, let's just throw everything at it. Yep, 32 gig fiber channel, all flash, blah. No, we can take a step back and we can design to what the business requirements are. So then,
in other words, you're saying I should not take my Tesla to my horse cart racing.
No. Yeah, Tesla in insane mode against your horse cart. Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
So it's just that. Go, mate. Sorry.
I was about to ask the next section, which was, yes, you have touched on CPUs, you have touched on hard drives, but a lot of people ignore the memory. So I'm a customer and I need to, expand my virtualization farm, and I've got like 256 gig RAM. I'm happy with it. Give me 512. Oh, that'll be good. Is that the right way to look at it?
If you're a VMware customer, and particularly, I would say this is true for like 3/4 of the customers I see out there. Yeah. If they could go back and buy their infrastructure again and change one part of the configuration at day one, it would be memory, and they would put more memory in. So I think CPUs and VMware or ESXi, vSphere, is very good, but you run out of memory. You can run a lot of virtual machines. You can run a lot more virtual machines on a physical host than I think what most people typically do. And typically, I think their limiting factor will be memory. So I always encourage people to go, right. And again, Live Optics can really help us with that, because when we see customers and we go, right, okay, the total amount of memory you've got across your cluster is X, and we see that you're basically at X all the time and using all of that, and then cool, we have a justification for putting more memory into a new solution. And then for customers where workloads have changed, the kind of workloads they're running and the way things are progressing now, we see a lot more pressure on memory from the likes of SAP HANA and other applications that are running memory. Like SAP HANA isn't an in-memory database. The name gives it away, right? It just
spot on.
Give it what it wants. And so the industry has responded to that because typical DIMMs, 32 and 64 gig DIMMs, I think are pretty economical in this day and age.
Yep.
In ANZ region in particular, we still see a huge premium. Remember July 2020, we are 128 gig DIMMs are still, I'll keep it G-rated. I won't say exactly the word I was going to use to, prove how expensive they are. They're very expensive. But now we have other options. So at a generic level, persistent memory, whether that's sort of NVDIMM or we go down the Intel branded route with their Intel data center persistent storage. So cool, funky, persistent memory. Now we have other options and customers can look at doing things differently with that sort of persistent RAM solution. It may mean nothing for some customers, and other customers, that's a huge door opener and can fundamentally change the way they operate. So that's a huge one.
That's a very big point that you've touched, and I think we should cover more of this in our future videos, especially if we get more comments from people.
Yes,
they ask for it. We have to cover this in the future one, because I would certainly love to know more about this DC persistent memory.
Yeah,
and then
we can touch on that.
To my data center.
We've also got. I think we could do a session on server architecture and how that's changing. How it's changing right now today with those sorts of things, but also we could talk about some futures on how we think servers are going to look with that disaggregation of CPU and memory. And that good idea, mate. We'll do that for another one. And we keep talking about future stuff we're going to do. Yeah, now we've got to do it.
Spot on.
Yeah.
So we've touched memory, we have touched storage, we have touched compute. One thing that always is out of reach for most of our IT administrators like myself is networking. That always comes in last. That the guy who sits in the corner always says, I always use brand X.
Yeah. Hey, look, and there's no hiding that, right? Brand X. Look, that is the elephant in the room in networking. And look, brand X is Cisco, right? And fair enough, they own the market. They absolutely do. But that doesn't mean that other vendors, ourselves included, aren't offering, personally, what I think are probably better solutions in this day and age. And I'm not ragging on Cisco there. They own the market, but they also have a huge legacy in the way that they do things and the products that they sell versus, Dell is effectively a newcomer, relatively speaking, into that market, really driving that open networking and a different approach to how we do things. So, but the biggest problem that we normally face is when, whether it's a customer or even ourselves internally or the channel partner that people are aligned with, what switch? We've got a large portfolio of data center switches, and where do we start? So again, we've got a tool to help us with that.
That was my next question. You just answered it. What is it?
Yeah. And so again, this isn't available for customers, for our end users to use directly, but again, as pre-sales within Dell or channel partners, again, have access to this, and it's called Fabric Design Center. Now within that Fabric Design Center, once we've been through all those other things on working out what is the right solution, is this going to be 3-tier? Are we looking at HCI thing? Once we've got that narrowed down, now we can start looking at the fabric and the network and how we're going to glue all this together. And within Fabric Design Center, you can select the solution. So you might be doing a VxRail solution. Cool. So now I select VxRail, specify how many nodes I've got in there, what the node type is, what the network cards are, how many network cards on that node. You effectively like build up the cluster. Then what Fabric Design Center does, it designs the fabric, comes back and goes, right, here you go.
Wow.
Here's a switch that you need for out-of-band management, because, you know, it'd be remiss of me not to mention out-of-band management and talk about Open Managed Enterprise and iDRAC. that is my job.
Yes.
But then, cool. And these are the data center switches that you should be looking at using, and not just looking at using. These are the ones that you should use. And you've said that you're going to have, I don't know, five rail nodes to start with, but you want to expand through to 8 as an example. It calculates all of that. It gives you a bill of materials. It says, right, here's all the cables that you need. Some of the settings you can set are like, are you putting the switches in the top of the rack, the middle, or the bottom? So it can, you know, work out some cable lengths. You can sit down with the customer then and go, right, what's the IP address ranges that you're using for everything, and start entering all that information into that tool as well. It spits out topology diagrams, wiring diagrams, and config files. So once you've done all that design work, and then customer goes, yeah, you're fantastic, mate, buy it all. Someone's got to configure that switch and make it work on day one.
Yes.
You've done all that work. Why not use it? So you can download the config file for the switch onto a USB drive, plug it into the switch, power the switch on, and that config will get stamped over the switch. So all the design work that you did, all that programming, you know, what IP addresses are being used, what all the VLANs are, and because you've got a port wiring diagram and everything, you know what ports to plug in, that's all done. The risk of setting up that new network is zero, and the time to get it set up is massively reduced as well.
Absolutely. And that's, you've just, you know, going back to my previous life where I was an IT administrator myself, I mean, that thing could have been just godsend. Where, you know, it's like, I'll give you an example where I was involved in a project, and it was, you know, rushing to the Christmas time. We're making sure that the environment is up and ready before the Christmas freeze comes in and all that stuff, as a lot of people in the enterprise IT would know. What happened is the person who ordered all the parts forgot to add the right number of optics. We had all the servers in there, but we just couldn't connect. We couldn't do anything with them.
Yeah.
It's a simple part. It's like a small box, but hey, it stalled the whole project.
And I reckon everyone that has ever rolled out some new infrastructure, for me, we had one, and working with a mate when I was back in New Zealand, and, you know, a lot of people know Mike Webster from his VMware writing SQL book days, and now as a, you know, the head of performance engineering at Nutanix. But Mike and I actually rolled out a project together in Auckland, and we had a simple configuration problem and a firmware problem as well. But that was something that was in the design, had just been missed. Flow control across the ports that all the virtual hosts were plugging into. And it was causing all sorts of problems. And we're trying to work this out. And of course, to try and troubleshoot that and see the settings across the switch, across all those ports that those hosts were plugged into, that is a small thing, and it was creating us all sorts of headaches. So now you don't have that. Now, if we'd had this tool, if we'd had Fabric Design Center back then when Mike and I were rolling that particular infrastructure out, oh my God, it would have saved us, 5 days basically. In the end is how long we spent troubleshooting that with VMware and the hardware vendor at the time. A lot of pizza, a lot of Coke. I was a lot slimmer then. I blame this on that one then.
Well, in my example that I just gave you, we literally had to get the vendor to ship those parts on a plane from Singapore. Over like 3 days' time. Imagine the amount of money and the stress and the energy we were spending on that.
So, just trying to get it going. Yeah,
and that was just literally that big box with like 5 or 10 SFPs in there, optics in them. Yeah, it was that simple.
So we've got all these tools. I mean, I guess one of the things that I would like to say to customers when they're thinking about this stuff is try. It's really good to educate yourself, and I think it's good. Customers need to be part of the process, but
Yep.
try not to get to a point where you're just being prescriptive. Like I've literally just today received an email from a customer that outlined a whole bunch of stuff and went, right, what we want is X. I'm like, oh, okay. How have they come to that conclusion? And they might be bang on the money. Unfortunately, I would suggest more often than not, customers aren't. Particularly if they, again, have had a long-lived infrastructure, and the last time they were looking at buying new kit was 5 years ago, and now they're trying to re-educate themselves on what is available, yada, 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 then it's quite easy to get stuck in a rut and go, well, I had 6 servers, I had dual CPUs, and I run VMware on it, and I have a SAN. Cool. Let's just, we need a new one because it's getting so old now, it's costing us too much to maintain that. So we'll put a new one in. And instead of taking a step back and going, right, what might be the best way to do this now?
Yeah, it's spot on, because the thing is, you kind of like you said, you might come in with a perceived idea that this is what worked in my environment, and surely if I replace like to like, it would just work. And yes, it will work, but you may not get the best return on your investment.
Correct. You will likely pay a lot of money. And then the other kind of customer, I guess, we get is the one that's like, oh, great. They're really hung up on architecture. 3-tier is dead. I must have an HCI solution. Yep. And again, in our previous vlog, we talked about HCI. It's huge in the industry. There's no point in denying that at all. But is it the right thing for everything? No. Neither is a 3-tier approach. I don't think there's a silver bullet for all things. But when they come in with a preconceived idea of, I must have, number of customers that we've spoken to, and then we actually talk about their requirements. And I had a customer that was absolutely adamant that they wanted VxRail. Lovely, like I work for Dell. We love selling VxRail. Fantastic. Yeah. We actually started looking at their requirements and going, cool. They ran a very specific application, and the vendor of that solution had a reference architecture that, unless you built out on one of their reference architectures, they wouldn't support it. So it didn't matter that this customer had a really passionate individual in there who had used HCI at a previous job. Now he's in there and he's like, this is the answer. Oh, mate, your main app's not even going to run on it. So
that's right. Oh, it may run, but it may not be supported. So
which is absolutely. A very important point. Very important point, actually. Sorry, you're right. It would run. No doubt about that. Would it be supported? No. And that's a very important consideration. Things will run. Absolutely. Yes. Will it run? Yes. Will it be supported? Yeah.
Possibly not. And may not perform as well because the application is tweaked because of or to run on a certain kind of hardware. So it may not getting you the best performance outputs.
In some scenarios. I will also admit that I think sometimes, particularly in those sort of applications that have a reference architecture around them, some of those application vendors are laggards with adopting new ways of doing things. But hey, we can't control that. So we just have to live with that.
Yep. And very interesting point, like leading up to my next question, which was, yes, a certain application vendor is, asking you to use a certain, specific model type or your hardware type. But at the same time, what happens if certain industries, like recent example being telco industry, where they've been mandated to use or avoid certain equipments being manufactured in a certain country? Let's put the name out, China.
Country of origin stuff. Look, and we see a lot of that at the moment, particularly around some of those Chinese brand names and various governments mandating or excluding them from bits and pieces. So I think that's just another it probably comes in right up front at the very beginning when we were talking about, you know, what vendor would you look at, and, you know, the how long the vendor's been around for, or reputation, or what their support's like. That's probably just something that falls into those considerations.
Yeah.
If you're in an environment where there is some legislation around country of origin, then that's going to limit some of your choices.
Spot on, spot on. Look, that was some really good information, Richard. Like, I'm certainly more enlightened compared to when we started this conversation. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for bringing this information to all our attention.
No worries.
Lovely. Guys, I would, hopefully you liked this conversation that Richard and I had, and you benefited as much as I did personally. We wish you would be watching more of these, and please do let us know via your comments if you'd like to cover us more topics or similar topics in the future videos. Do like to share and subscribe to this channel. And Richard, we're going to talk about more interesting stuff in the future videos.
Yes, definitely,
like
my friend.
We touched, yes, like we touched a little bit in the during the conversation. So
100%.
please stay tuned, and yeah, look forward to catching up again in a fortnight's time.
See you in a couple of weeks' time. Cheers, mate.
See you, buddy. Take care.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.